All right, welcome back, grade 10s. This is our review for A2. A2 is the essay, and the essay is Wednesday. And I shared the essay topic with you almost 2 weeks ago now. And it is an essay topic that allows you to talk about everything we've done. And to some extent, that might make it more difficult because then you might be sitting there saying, well, what do I edit out? Yes, we will get, from 8:50 in the morning. You get started at 8:30 if you want. We'll have right up till 12:25 that day. I would hope you don't stay in here at lunch and keep typing throughout the lunch hour. But it's definitely, you have built-in double time for it. So you have lots of time. Theoretically, you have almost 4 hours. I don't want you to have to write for 4 hours. You don't want to write for 4 hours, so you need to have a plan coming in. And that's why I shared the essay topic with you, is I want you to be able to plan for it. So the first part of the essay, the analysis of source, is very similar to the assignment of the A1, if the A1 had been a quote. So in your first body paragraph, you're going to start talking about the theme of the source. You're going to start talking about how it connects to globalization, and here the word globalization is right in there. But we also want you to unpack the language of the source. And that happens in the analysis. The analysis of source is what some outside of social studies would call the introduction. But it's more than in an introduction, because there's a step that we have to do, which is actually break down the source. We have to analyze it, and it makes sense to analyze the source. We're analyzing the words within the source, we're breaking them down. So globalization built on the natural cornerstone. We've already talked about this source, but I want to review that in the analysis of source, there's room to define what globalization is, but there's also room for you to explore what are cornerstones, both in architecture, but also cornerstones for society. Political, economic, societal cornerstones. And here it's saying that a natural cornerstone would be that the strong should do what they want and the weak will suffer what they must. So that's realism, that's natural selection, survival of the fittest, social Darwinism. But then the second part of the source talks about how that natural cornerstone will provide us a mirror into our exploitive nature of mankind. So the first part of the source, the first phrase, up to here, is suggesting this is what it is. But it's also suggesting it's not necessarily a good thing. That globalization is built on the strong feeding on the weak, and that provides us this look into how we are, by nature, evil, exploitive people. So the source is showing an ideological perspective. Much like in A1, we should be able to do Control-Find on an A2 analysis and find the term ideological perspective. That in your analysis, in what appears to be the intro, you're discussing the ideological perspective of the source. What does the source think about globalization? Here we can see within the language that it believes that globalization is flawed because mankind is flawed. Globalization is flawed because mankind is exploited by nature. So then we look at how the source is presenting a problem. And the problem here is that we are exploitive. And then we look, is there any evidence that would further that, continue that logic? Have we seen the source to be true? And what's the significance of the problem being shown? Why should we care about addressing this issue that the source is presenting? Once we explore the significance of the problem and the ideological perspective or solution that we can infer that the source wants, then we talk about the division of society. Who might support the source and who might not support the source? And that logically leads you into, do you support the source? Which is your thesis at the end of that paragraph. So within that first analysis paragraph, We unpack the source. We look at the significance of the language. What does it mean when they say the strong? Maybe you define the strong. You talk about how the term the strong may mean different things. It could be a military strong, could be a political strong, could be a social strong, could be a cultural strong, could be a moral strength. What does suffering look like? So in the analysis, there's room to unpack or define and explore those key terms. And then it's natural you respond to the key terms with your position, and that's your thesis. That's the end of the analysis paragraph, the end of the intro. This first paragraph should be somewhere in that 3/4 to 1.5 pages in length, double-spaced. And it is a paragraph, and it's formal language in the sense that within the paragraph, you're not going to have little subtitles that say, what's the perspective of this source? Underlined subtitle. No, we need to weave that into language. One last thing about the thesis, when we talk about thesis statements, it needs to be a statement, not a question. A thesis question will get a failing grade on the essay. So your last sentence of your intro shouldn't be a question, it should be a statement of what you believe to be the best response to the issue being presented here. So I would argue that there's at least 2 things that your thesis statement must include. Something about cornerstone. You know, should we have as a cornerstone the strong feeding on the weak? You know, something about that cornerstone, and something about whether that cornerstone is natural. So you could have, although it may be natural, it is not ideal for the strong to feed on the weak. And that explores one of the big rocks of that source. The second big rock that the source has is this idea of the exploitive nature of mankind. You know, must man be defined as exploitive? Is that all we are? Is that all we will ever be? As instruments of exploitation? And it's tough because we have a lot of evidence that is what we are. You know, the transatlantic slave trade, what was it? It literally was a few getting wealthy on the misery of others. On the suffering and the misery of slaves, the British Crown and British colonists and British mercantilists got rich on the suffering of millions of African slaves. So we do have lots of evidence that supports the exploitation part. I would say to you that it's going to be important for Wednesday to come into class Wednesday with the thesis in mind. Because if after Wednesday's essay, you say to me, Mr. McBride, you know, I didn't get done. I didn't know what my thesis was. You're not going to get a lot of sympathy from me in the sense that we've talked about it for a couple of weeks. You've had the source in advance, and you have almost 4 hours on Wednesday to write an essay. So we're not going to discuss a redo at that point, because we've had so much pre-do all over this. So you need to come into Wednesday's class with your thesis ready, and with a body ready. So if this is my thesis, then what am I doing in my body? Where's my evidence? Because we have, again, many case studies to look at. Am I going to use India? How am I going to use India? How am I going to use the slave trade? How am I going to refer to Athens and the Molossians and the quote in a historical sense, the origins of the quote? Am I going to reference Sun Tzu and the idea of, you know, that we need to attack the enemy where they're weakest, and then I'm going to connect that to Gandhi and civil disobedience and the war of global public opinion that he won by not taking a militant stand against British colonialism. And there's lots of great case studies to fit in there. And it's good to have a plan going in. And it's also good to have some phrases. Like, oh man, I know I want to use this phrase or this word because it's going to elevate my language and it's going to elevate my entire paper with it. As my language bubbles up, then the rest of my paper will bubble up too. It'll look more impressive. Stronger language, stronger phrases, will make my argumentation more clear and therefore more convincing. So, you've been working on your essay, and we have the Chromebooks until lunch, but after lunch we're going to focus on multiple choice. So, I'm going to bring by a sanitizing wipe for you guys to clean up your Chromebooks and put them away, because Mr. Hebert's class needs them after lunch. Shout out to Mr. Hebert. Hi, Mr. Hebert. But before we give you the rest of the time before lunch to finish up your essay prep, does anyone have any essay questions? Yes, sir.
Were you supposed to get to a conclusion?
That's a good question. I don't want to give you the impression that the conclusion doesn't matter. But if you're struggling for time, it's better to put that time into the body than the conclusion. We have, at the provincial level, awarded 100% on the diploma for a student that had no conclusion before. It just stopped. That's not ideal, but the argument here that I'm presenting is the conclusion is the least important step. But here's what you do in the conclusion. You should see your conclusion as your final opportunity to present your argument. That's what your conclusion is. Final opportunity to present your argument. Having said that, the structure would be this. Concluding paragraph should begin with your thesis statement. Just copy and paste it. Same sentence, that's the last sentence of your intro, should be the first sentence of your conclusion. Exact same sentence, copy and paste it. Because your thesis was your promise to me, this is what I'm going to do in my body, and your conclusion is this is what I have done. So there's a natural organization there. So the first sentence of your conclusion is just a copying and pasting of your thesis. And then, let's say your body has 3 body paragraphs. I would say if it has 3 body paragraphs, then after my thesis is resubmitted there, I'm going to talk about each paragraph in 1 sentence. So if I had 5 body paragraphs, I'm going to have 5 sentences. If I had 2 body paragraphs, I'm going to have 2 sentences. And in each one of those sentences, I'm going to summarize my argumentation from those body paragraphs. What have I done? Summarize my argumentation, maybe weave my evidence in, but really just paraphrase and summarize what did I do in each of my body paragraphs. That's my conclusion. What shouldn't be in a conclusion is any new argumentation or any new evidence. If you're presenting new evidence, then you're not really concluding something, you're adding something. So if you're beginning your conclusion and you feel compelled to introduce more evidence, you're like, oh man, I haven't talked about the slave trade, and I'm going to talk about it here. Maybe instead you should have a paragraph on the slave trade. So what you don't do in a conclusion is introduce new argumentation or new evidence. What you do is begin by repeating the thesis, copy and paste it, word for word, exact same sentence, and then 1 sentence per paragraph of what was in the body, just summarizing, paraphrasing what was in that paragraph. This is like you're the lawyer, and the trial is all but over, and you have a closing statement. Your conclusion is like your closing statement. Sometimes in the conclusion, it'll be enough to get you past a threshold. So as you know, with any rubric, we have categories. Here's an L, an S, P, F, and E. Maybe so far your argumentation has been a PF level. But because in your concluding paragraph, your conclusion, the way that you paraphrase and combine your argumentation becomes more clear, maybe you'll jump your category up to an E. So it can help you. Your conclusion can help you. But the only category it should really help you in is argumentation. Sometimes students like to leave their conclusion with a quote, with a big picture thing that is the opposite of the beginning of the intro. So the beginning of the intro is like a wide range, what is this about? It's about globalization. And then the intro becomes more and more specific as you break down the language of the source. Some people see the conclusion as kind of an inversion of the intro. So if the intro goes from broad to very specific, then the conclusion goes from specific, the same thesis statement, back to broad. So some people will end the conclusion with some kind of broad statement. I'm not going to tell you not to do it, but I'm not sure it's going to move the needle. I'm not going to say it's going to really improve your mark that much. But if you have a broad statement, a quote that just couldn't fit into your essay, and it's like just a quote about globalization or about the nature of mankind, it's not going to lower your mark if you leave it as your final sentence. So sometimes people, the last sentence of their essay might be that. Some kind of general, or not general, some kind of a philosophical statement, trying to connect the source to like something even bigger. I wouldn't spend too much time trying to plan that sentence, because I've seen some students frozen with academic paralysis because they don't know what to do in that final sentence. They're like, man, I want to leave this with something poetic, right? I want to really leave it and leave an impression with my marker. Unless you have something going in, I wouldn't belabor myself during the exam. Time is better invested going back, especially after looking at your guys' work so far. Time would be better invested by doing a final edit of your communication than spending 30 minutes trying to think of some quote by Mark Twain to wrap it up. So go back, look at pronouns, proper nouns, look at spacing. Everything should be double spaced, little things like that. Any other questions about the essay? So I'm going to come by with a wipe before lunch. We still have 12 minutes left, but before lunch we'll get you to wipe down your Chromebook and put them in the cart. After lunch, I'm going to get you to review a little bit of your multiple choice notes of the year. So just go over your notebook, and then it's going to be hopefully question and answer rapid fire when you got tons of questions, because I have 58 for you on Thursday. So you should have a few for me today. All right, so enjoy the next 12 minutes to review for your essay, and we'll look at multiple choice review after lunch.